Lewandowski, Raphinha, Lamine Yamal, killer Barca, 101 goals, 32 games, averaging over 3 goals a game. Front page of Mundo Deportivo. So, Sid, I understand this rhetoric, which has been great. Killer Barca, obviously, they scored 7 at the weekend against a horrible Valencia side. But we've seen them trip up, obviously, in home games against inferior opposition, which leads me to the question, are Barcelona any good?
Yes, they are, but they do have some flaws. I don't think there's many teams out there that don't have flaws. I think you can see certain patterns as well. You know, you mentioned the fact they scored 7 against a horrible Valencia team. They scored 7 twice this season. They've scored 5, I think, 3 times this season. They scored 5 in Lisbon against Benfica. Bear in mind, they scored 9 in 2 games against Real Madrid. Now, if there is a test of how good you are, in the Spanish league at least, it's against Real Madrid. They lost to Atletico, maybe that's the other test. I think part of what's happened, if you look at the games, the 3 in a row that they lost at home, Leganés and Las Palmas and Atletico Madrid, in all 3 of them, there was... I think those 3 teams are different. I'm not going to claim they played exactly the same way, but there were certain patterns that were repeated, and that is defensive teams playing deep, not allowing Barcelona a chance to run into the space beyond them. And of course, this is a Barcelona team that's different to the identity we've seen of Barcelona in the past, that is really, really good flooding into the space behind teams. And that in particular, I think, is one of the reasons why we've seen such a brilliant season from Raphinha, because that suits him so well. And I think what's happened is against the teams that haven't allowed them to do that, they found it hard to find a way through. In the games when they've scored loads of goals, they've generally scored pretty early. And those teams have either been forced out or were already playing out, and so they could keep going behind them. So I think the answer is yes, they are a good team, but they have to be at their best. They have to be at their best both physically and in terms of being efficient in front of goal. Look at the Valencia game at the weekend. Now, obviously, you score 7 goals, it would be ridiculous to start picking holes in it. But I think I'm right in saying that they scored from 4 of their first 5 shots. And when you have that degree of efficiency, obviously very big results follow.
Where are Barcelona in the context of the Champions League, Stevie?
I'd have to say, in all honesty, second tier.
Second tier?
Well,
who's in the top tier?
I think right now, Liverpool are out on their own.
So Liverpool are in the top tier?
Yeah.
On their own?
Liverpool right now are quite some distance ahead of anybody else that you can see on that board. I don't think there's any doubt about that. When we talk about Liverpool this year, we're struggling to find flaws.
Okay.
When we start talking about Barcelona, the reason we're talking about them is because they've got a couple of huge flaws, particularly the old high line.
Okay.
And that's what's going to mean that Barcelona could get knocked out in the next round, as opposed to the semi or the final or whatever it is. And then when we start going past that, we're picking flaws in everybody else as well. So that's why I'm saying that they're in the second tier. Liverpool right now, if the final was tomorrow, regardless of who Liverpool were playing, they would be favourites. I don't think we can say that about Barcelona. If they're playing Arsenal or Atletico Madrid or Real Madrid or anybody, because we know that they've got some big flaws.
Well, if they play Real Madrid, they would be favourites, because whenever they play Real Madrid, it's a mismatch. And part of that has to do with what Sid was talking about, that Real Madrid will play with Barcelona. They're not just going to sit in. And so I wonder about matchups for Barcelona in Champions League. Say they get drawn to play against Inter in a knockout.
Yeah.
A team like Inter that will absorb pressure, and they have no issues in putting 2 lines of defensive lines and saying, okay, this is where we're going to park ourselves, try to break us down, and we're dangerous in the counter. And we can hurt you in the counter, and we have enough players in the counter that can really exploit some of the vulnerabilities of Barcelona. So that's I think, the sort of team that can make it very difficult for Barcelona, that will defend well and also have talent going forward. A team like Inter is somebody that Barcelona doesn't want to see in Champions League.
I think the best example of what I'm talking about would be Barcelona against Bayern. Barcelona, if somebody was to just turn over a page and look at the results and look, 4-1 against Bayern, it could have been the other way around.
Of course.
So that's the problem Barca have. There's nothing consistent about them, and you're not sure what you're going to get.
So you talk about the efficiency in front of goal. Of course, one player that's epitomised that this season is Raphinha. Imagine if Williams had joined and did what Raphinha was doing now.
Yeah, we'd be talking about, a truly great signing. We'd be talking about a player that's tearing up the league. We'd be talking about someone who, wow, we knew this kid was good and now he's demonstrating it. I think the fact that he didn't come and the fact that he could have done is one of the reasons why Raphinha is playing so well.
What I really like about Raphinha, beyond the fact of this Nico Williams conversation, is that he had competition that he was never going to win already in Barcelona with Lamine Yamal. And so he had to make a decision himself. And this doesn't happen naturally for players. This is not easy for players to accept. The 17-year-old is going to play ahead of me. So that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have to accept that. And in order for me to make the most out of my experience here in Barcelona, I have to find a different role. And a role that suits my skill set and a role that does something different for this club. And he's done that beautifully. This willingness to run in behind, to get on the end of service from Lamine Yamal, the guy who sat you on the bench potentially, and who basically had you change your style of play, now you're taking advantage. You're taking advantage of the 17-year-old, of what he can give to you so that you can give to him and you can give to the club. It seems like it would be an obvious thing to do, and it is not. It is not. A well-established player, international player, who is basically told, the kid is going to play, you got to sort yourself out somewhere else.
Speaking of kids, Sid, why are Barcelona getting rid of all of theirs?
Well, they're not getting rid of all of them, but of course what they're trying to do is find exits because, of course, they're trying to generate money because they're looking at players that they feel don't necessarily have a place in the team. You look, for example, at Ansu Fati, and he hasn't been in. I think he's only been in the squad in one of the last 5 games. Hansi Flick was being very clear that he wasn't sure exactly what his role was going to be in the summer. I think he thought it would be bigger, but it's not so much now. You've got other players where you're trying to give opportunities to them, and of course it helps with the financial fair play as well if you can release some of that salary margin. But bear in mind it's not very much when you're talking about young players for the most part, and so that's not the kind of, if you like, that's not the sole reason.